Welcome to Rawson Connection, a podcast about all things Lehigh engineering. Coming to you from the P.C. Rawson College of Engineering and Applied Science at Lehigh University. It's a show for students, alumni, faculty, and staff, current, former, and future, and for anyone interested in the many creative ways that engineers are solving the world's problems. I'm your host and producer, Christine Fennessy. Today's episode is part 2 of my interview with mechanical engineering professor of practice and astronaut Terry Hart. We're devoting 2 episodes to Terry because he's had a really interesting life. As an engineer, a fighter pilot, an inventor, an astronaut, and as a Lehigh professor. And when you've led that kind of life, you've racked up some pretty great stories. In this episode, we learn about Terry's 1984 space mission, about what it's like to prepare for something for 2 years, and why weightlessness felt pretty miserable at first, and why his mission was historic and almost didn't happen. He also talks about his life after NASA, about the future of space exploration, and how he felt about being named to deliver the commencement address for the 2020 class. The pandemic, of course, changed graduation, and so Terry hasn't delivered that speech. Not yet, anyway. But he's got it ready to go, and he does share a little of it here. Today's conversation begins in 1978, after Terry was selected out of 8,000 applicants to become one of just 35 astronauts. They were known as Group 8, and it was the first astronaut group to include African Americans, Asian Americans, and women. I started by asking Terry to describe what astronaut training is like. He often says that in 6 years at NASA, he never took an actual test.
Yes, when you start, there's some classroom work, so you get some lectures. The astronauts come from a broad variety of backgrounds. Some are pilots, test pilots. Others are medical doctors. A lot of scientists from every field you can imagine. So everybody has to kind of be brought up to the same level. The pilots have to learn the science, and the scientists have to learn about flying, all that kind of thing. So that takes some classroom work. That goes on for about a year. And then in the afternoons, you might be flying airplanes or in the simulators, where the simulators now you start learning like the hydraulic system on the space shuttle. So there's a special simulator for that, and you have a trainer that sits there with you, and you kind of walk through the aspects of that. And that builds over the year until you're ready to be assigned to a flight crew, and then you participate in a full-up simulation. Usually, well, it doesn't have to be, but often with mission control online as well.
Okay. Well, all right. So now for your shuttle flight in April of 1984, you and your crew had several tasks. And can you describe what they were and what your role was in them?
Yeah, we had actually one of the most exciting missions of the early part of the program. We were to do the first rendezvous of the space shuttle program with a satellite that had been disabled called Solar Maximum. It was launched by NASA 4 years earlier, and it was spinning out of control because of a failure in the attitude control system. So we trained for 2 years, actually, to do the rendezvous. That was my part, actually, with my commander, Bob Crippen. We did the first rendezvous of the space shuttle program. And then to do the spacewalks, our other 2 crewmates, George Nelson and Jim Van Hoften, trained underwater in a large swimming pool at NASA, where they would learn how to actually repair the satellite. And part of that was my job, too, using the mechanical arm to capture the satellite.
So you trained for 2 years to do this one specific task with the rendezvous?
Yes, the rendezvous sequence goes on for 3 days, actually, from the time you launch and establish an orbit in space to the time you actually hook up with in this case, the Solar Maximum satellite. So we would rehearse and train for all the different maneuvers that had to be done in the course of those 3 days to get up real close to the satellite. And then once we were close, then I could grab it with the space shuttle mechanical arm.
Okay. What is it like to do 2 years of rehearsal for something like that? I mean, were you dreaming about this maneuver at the end?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's the tension and the excitement builds, of course, during that 2-year period. But it's more than just training, because when we start, we don't know how to do the mission quite yet. So we work with the engineers and the controllers and mission control to figure out how to do the nominal mission, but even more importantly, how to do the off-nominal cases where something breaks or something goes wrong with the space shuttle or on the ground with one of the tracking radars. And then you fine tune all those backup procedures, and you practice those in a simulator, and you get surprised. I mean, there's an engineer in the back of the mission control called SimSoup, the simulation supervisor, and he or she injects failures into the mission so that the mission control team and the crew on board have to react and exercise all these different backup procedures that we had planned.
And so part of your mission was this spacecraft repair, but you're also releasing the long duration exposure facility. Can you explain what that was?
Sure. Yeah, that was an interesting satellite spacecraft that was designed by NASA Langley. And it was like a big cylinder, about 14 feet in diameter and about 32 feet long. So it took up almost the entire space shuttle cargo bay. It weighed 35,000 pounds. And on it were a number of experiments, 85 different experiments from 150 scientists all around the world with different kind of materials. And they wanted to test to see how things weather in space. And some other experiments would gather cosmic rays or micrometeorites, that kind of thing. And then 6 years later, another shuttle mission brought it back to Earth, and they could see the results of the experiments. And that went a long way to helping them plan how to build the space station, because things weather in space, and you don't want to have to do too many maintenance missions to maintain the space station. So it was a pretty cool experiment to be on.
Yeah, definitely. And just to go back to the rendezvous element of your mission, when you were training, did you have to also train in each other's capacities in case something happened where you would have to do the spacewalk? Was that part of your training as well?
Yes, that's a good point, because there were 5 of us on the mission, so there's always at least 2 people that know how to do everything in case someone's not feeling well or whatever. And really just to be able to check on each other, we sort of watch what each other's doing. So if you understand the job yourself, like for rendezvous, for example, my commander, Bob Crippen, was actually executing the maneuvers, on the space shuttle. But I was helping him load those into the computer and do the calculations, and then just to observe that everything was going well. And the mechanical arm, that was just the opposite. Then I was trained as the primary operator for the mechanical arm, but my commander, Bob Crippen, was the backup on that.
Okay. And did you also have to work underwater? Did you have to do that aspect of it as well?
A little bit. I was a mission specialist like the other 2 that did the spacewalk, George Nelson and Jim Van Hoften. So I would do familiarization training with them. Again, they would basically do the spacewalk, but they were often using the mechanical arm, so they would give me instructions to how to move them around on the end of the mechanical arm. So again, to better understand how to do that, I would actually do their job sometimes in the swimming pool and learn how to repair the satellite, so I could better visualize when they asked me to do something, what it is they were trying to do.
Okay. And so just to go back to my thought about dreaming about this, because I can't imagine when you're doing something over and over and there's that much pressure on it, how that must sort of affect your, your subconscious.
Yeah, it's just a lot of excitement, because it was a 2-year training period. In those last 6 months leading up to the launch, you're the prime crew, so all their training and resources are prioritized for you. So it's a very exciting period as the excitement builds up, toward the launch. Dreams. I guess I would dream about the mission. We had a saying at NASA that we wanted to maintain an even strain. And that phrase has its origins all the way back in the early space program. Because of this excitement that builds up, you need to kind of take a deep breath sometimes and maintain your perspectives on things. So we would often, under those pressure, we say, okay, let's take a deep breath now, and we're going to step back for a while, maybe not do any simulations for another day or 2, and look at the procedures or do something a little different to kind of maintain that proper stress level so that you don't become overly excited as you get close to launch.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how long were those days in those last 6 months before the launch?
Yeah, the days are pretty long. It's actually a little bit longer for the people in mission control. When I was at Capcom, I got that experience where you really only get a handful of hours off a day. You're in and out of mission control. You're on shift or planning your next shift. The crews in space, they try to not schedule more than 16 hours of activities a day. So you have 8 hours, which is kind of booked as sleep, but most astronauts only sleep like 4 to 6 hours. That seems to be adequate because once you are asleep in weightlessness, it's very restful. There's no tossing or turning or anything. So there's a little free time during that 8 hours to look out the window and watch the world go by and take photographs, that kind of thing, before you go to sleep.
Oh, I see. I see. So I was asking about the hours leading up to the launch, but you're talking about when you're actually up in space. Your days were
Yeah,
16 hours. Okay. Okay.
it's actually kind of the same thing in a way because when you're in those couple of months right before the launch, you're just reliving the mission over and over again in these simulations. The simulations will go on for 3 or 4 days at a time. So you do go home at night to sleep, but the other 16 hours you're in the simulator, or if you're Capcom, you're in mission control, rehearsing the mission. So it's almost like being on a mission during those days.
And how do you simulate weightlessness on Earth?
Well, that's a tough one. So the only way to really practice the tasks that you have to do is to go in the swimming pool. So you have to put the spacesuit on to do that. And it's pretty realistic. It's actually, we learned over time if you could do a task with the spacesuit on underwater and you design the tools and figure out the procedures for doing a particular task, like repairing the satellite, if you could do it in the pool, you could do it easier in space. Our training system was a little harder because weightlessness is actually a little bit easier once you get used to it.
And did that prove true with your crewmate that did the spacewalk? Did he say that it was easier to do it in space?
Yes, absolutely. The training environment's difficult because it's hard to totally simulate weightlessness. So what we end up with under the pool is actually a little bit tougher than the actual task. And almost every spacewalker comes back and says, our training is good because it's actually harder than the real task.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. So now I know that you have described the launch thousands of times probably by now. But, you talk about the launch in terms of the G's on your chest and this organ pipe resonance and Mach noise. And I was just wondering if you could take me through the launch, but help me understand when you talk about G's on your chest and Mach noise, like what does a G feel like to someone who's never felt that? And is there something analogous to Mach noise that I could perhaps understand a little bit better with the experience of the launch?
Sure. Well, when you're sitting in a chair and you're kind of relaxing, that's one gravity, of course, one G. And the direction is, from your head down. So, we're used to that, and that's our normal daily activity. When you climb into the space shuttle or any launch vehicle to get ready to launch, you're pretty much on your back. So now the G-force is onto your chest, and there's a little bit of more pressure in your head from being in that position. So that's not uncomfortable for most people. Your feet are up a little higher as you're resting in the seat there at launch. And then, so you're there for about an hour and a half or so, typically before liftoff, but it's not, too uncomfortable. And then the engines light up, and boom, you're off and going. So we go from that 1G that you were feeling on your chest to about 3Gs, which is about like two more people your size laying on top of your chest, if you can imagine that. So it's I wouldn't say it's hard to breathe, but you have to consciously try to breathe because of the pressure, on your chest. And then on top of that, there's a little bit of vibration. The shuttle was pretty much a pussycat that way. I think the hardest launch vehicle for the American astronauts was the Titan. I think that vehicle got up to about 4 Gs of acceleration with more vibration. The shuttle was limited to 3 Gs, and the vibration was really not too bad. It was only in the first 2 minutes. So you can still read displays and so forth. But if you want to throw a switch while you're under 3 Gs, you have to kind of practice that a little bit because when you go to reach up, your arm weighs 3 times heavier than you're used to it. So, so it's not something you can train on the Earth. You just have to kind of go through the experience and recognize that you're going to have to take special care when you go to reach for something under those kind of G loads.
Interesting, interesting. And when you're talking about things like organ pipe resonance and the Mach noise, what are you talking about there?
Yeah, the term organ pipe comes from the musical instrument, of course. The space shuttle's solid rockets were big hollow tubes, basically. And the frequency of resonance of that hollow tube as all the rocket gases, were being produced and come out, was around 11 hertz, 11 cycles per second. And that's a little too low to hear. But you feel it. You can feel it it's kind of like a woo. If it was a sound, it would be like a very, very low frequency sound. But instead it's an oscillation in the G forces on your body. So you feel it, and it feels pretty good, actually. So you know you're going somewhere. You're 3 Gs, and all of a sudden there's this wah, wah, wah behind it that's pushing you on. And that continues for about 2 minutes. In the case of the space shuttle, after 2 minutes, the solid rockets would be depleted of their fuel, and they would separate away there. And then at that point, it was kind of an interesting change that I could describe here in a minute, if you like.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it was. I think the whole mission, it was the thing that surprised me the most, because you talk to people that have flown. There were several space shuttle flights before I went, so I had people to talk to about the shuttle, but also the Apollo astronauts had flown on the Saturn. So you get used to after 2 minutes, you're used to this 3 Gs, and then all of a sudden those rockets go away, and the shuttle with its big tank there was still pretty heavy. And the liquid rockets in the tail of the shuttle there only have so much thrust. So we went from 3 Gs down to about 1.25 Gs. But the sensation was that we were almost like being weightless, and it felt like we were going back down again into the ocean or something. It was the strangest feeling. And then, of course, as the tank got lighter and lighter, as the shuttle burned off fuel, then the G loads would build back up to about 3 Gs at about 6.5 minutes. And then the main engines would actually throttle back so as not to exceed 3 Gs, which was the structural design limit of the shuttle. So that ride was kind of like a lot of push, then all of a sudden you feel pretty light in the seat, then the push builds up. And then, of course, when you reach orbital velocity, the engines would shut down, and then you'd be weightless. You'd be right to 0 G.
Oh, wow. And what do you mean by Mach noise? What is that?
Okay, so in that first 2 minutes, when you go through the altitude that most airliners fly at, like 30 or 40,000 feet, the space shuttle, it's like a minute after launch. The space shuttle is going supersonic, so it forms shock waves on it. Sometimes you can see those if the air is humid. You can actually see it on the launch films. And they would make a buffeting sound, they're very aerodynamic, noisy kind of sound. But then, by the 2 minute period where the solid rockets would come off from the ground, it doesn't look like the shuttle's all that high, but really it's right on the edge of space right there. So there's almost no air left above you. So things get very quiet, which is very eerie because you have all this thrust, and your thrust is building back up, acceleration is building back up to 3 Gs. Yet it's perfectly quiet. You can hear the fans on the computers running. It's kind of strange to have all that power but no noise once you're in a vacuum.
Yeah, definitely. And you had mentioned that, in other talks that you had given, that these were things that you didn't expect, the sudden, lessening of the pressure going from 3 Gs to 1.25 and then everything getting so quiet. And then there was another thing that you said you weren't quite ready for was the total blackness of space.
That did surprise me. It's ironic, but when you're in space, you don't really see the stars. And the reason is the sun is so bright coming directly from the sun without going through the atmosphere. It's so bright, and it reflects off the Earth with a lot of brightness. And the shuttle's tiles are white. So when you look out the window, again, there's a lot of light coming off the tiles. So your eyes stop way down. The pupils of your eyes are real tiny because the light's so bright. So when you look into the blackness of space, your eyes aren't sensitive enough to see the stars. You can see the moon, but not the stars. So it's a blackness that you feel like you could reach out and touch. It's almost surreal, and that you would look at the shuttle's tiles out the window, they'd be gleaming bright white. And right next to the bright white is this total blackness, like you've never seen. And it's the contrast is just so dramatic that no one had told me to expect that. Yeah, I guess every astronaut goes up for the first time has something that surprised them that they didn't hear from someone that went before them.
And when you had that sensation of, the vehicle going down from 3 Gs, did you think for a split second that maybe something was wrong because the sensation was so unexpected?
Yeah, I was right in the middle seat, so I could watch the engines. I could see all the engine gauges. So I kept on checking the engines about every 5 seconds because it just didn't seem like they were at full power. But of course they were. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And now you've said that weightlessness is fun, but it was the biggest challenge. And I think that you said that you were actually motion sick and that had never happened before in training. Is that right?
Yeah, I was actually I had one of the worst experiences, I guess, it turns out about 2/3 of the astronauts that go up don't feel totally fine the first day. 1/3 go up and they're fine. So Bob Crippen, our commander, was one of those. You know, he flew on the very first space shuttle as the pilot, and he was fine. But you don't know because there's no correlation to any kind of motion sickness problems on Earth. In fact, one of the Skylab astronauts who was very sick for a couple of days was Bill Poe, and he was an Air Force Thunderbird. So he had done everything. And I was a fighter pilot. I never had any kind of sense of motion sickness. But within 10 minutes after the engine shut down and we were weightless, I knew I was in trouble. My body just wasn't reacting right, and I wasn't moving around too much. But just all of a sudden, I could tell. I was going to be sick. But fortunately, it never lasts more than a day or so. I was still a little washed out the second day, but everybody's fine by the third day. And so we generally don't plan spacewalks or anything like that until the third day.
Okay. And so this is a gross question, but do people throw up in space, and what happens when that happens?
Well, we use towels and so forth to try to avoid it getting around obnoxiously. But yeah, it happens. But we're all prepared for it. And they think it's roughly 2/3 of the people that go have some problem. But again, I was kind of on the extreme side of that
man.
curve. Yeah.
Were you able to do your job in those first 24 hours, or were you just kind of...
Barely. All I had to do the first day was to unberth the mechanical arm and check it out. And I did that with Bob Crippen watching me very closely because he knew I was struggling.
Wow, that must be a terrible feeling. I mean, it's terrible anyway, but being in space.
I told the doctors when I got back that I think because I had no sense of motion sickness on the ground, airplanes, boats. I've done everything. Never had any trouble. But when I went to try to sleep that first night, I did fall asleep. But just for a few minutes, and then I woke up with a nightmare that I was falling, and I was because you're weightless, you're falling.
Right.
And I think what triggered my bad reaction was almost kind of a brainstem fear of falling that we all have.
Huh.
I think I didn't have any conscious sense of fear. I was elated. We were in space. I was there. And then all of a sudden, my GI tract was clearly not cooperating. And I think whatever brainstem reaction I had was maybe more powerful than most people would expect to have from a fear of falling. Because I woke up in a start and I kind of tried to grab something because I thought I was falling. And then when I finally fell asleep, I was better the next day. But yes, I told the doctors that when I got back, and they all kind of looked at me like, well, maybe, I don't know. They're still trying to figure it out, but it's a different animal than motion sickness on Earth.
So bizarre. Yes. Okay. Well, now, could you tell the story of the rendezvous? Because that wasn't without problems. And, it was a little high stress and questionable whether it would happen, right? And so can you tell the story of what happened and your role in, ultimately making it happen?
We train for every possible failure that we can think might happen, and then we find ways to work around them, so you can still get the mission done, even though things don't work right. But this one we didn't anticipate. So we did the rendezvous went fine. So the middle of the third day, we're closing in on the satellite, and I got the arm ready. I'm going to grab it. But the plan was initially for George Nelson, once we stopped about 200 feet in front of the satellite, for George Nelson to fly over using the backpack, the manned maneuvering unit. So he's untethered, and he flies over to the Solar Max, which is rotating slowly. And right under one of the solar panels, there's a pin, a 1.5-inch diameter steel pin, that he's going to dock himself to, and then he'll use his thrusters to stop the rotation. And then once he stopped the rotation, then I would grab it with the mechanical arm. And that was the plan. So when he went to dock to the satellite on that little pin, instead of docking, the docking adapter malfunctioned and he bounced off the satellite. So he tried that 3 times, and each time he hit the satellite, it started spinning and tumbling in a different way. So now we had a mess on our hands because I was prepared as a backup to grab the satellite without him being out there. I could match the rotation and grab it. But now it was tumbling, and so I tried a couple times to grab it, but we were running out of fuel, and it was kind of a mess. So we backed away for a day, about 10 miles behind the satellite, and parked ourselves back there. And then the ground took over and got the satellite back in a slow spin again without the tumbling. And then we came in on the next day without the spacewalkers out there. I just grabbed it with the mechanical arm. Then I was able to match rotation rates with it, grab it with the mechanical arm and burst it. Now we were back on normal plan. Once we had it in the payload bay, then the next day, then the crew could go out and do their spacewalk to start the repair.
Wow. Okay. And is there anything that I'm sure that you share that story often with your students. Is there anything that you pull out of that as a teachable moment, as it were, for your students?
Sure. I mean, you always have to expect the unexpected, which was what happened here. And it's not unusual in space missions, particularly that something will happen that no one anticipated. The value of your training, you say, okay, well, you didn't train for that specific thing, but the value of your training was that you learned how to work with the mission control people, and beyond that, the people in Goddard that were controlling the satellite that got it back under control and spun it up. All that team of people, that big pyramid of people, you know how to talk to them and you know how to work in real time with them because you've trained on all these other failure modes that could have happened. So when you're ready to go, you can handle something that you hadn't thought about before because that training is so good for the entire team to be able to work together.
Yeah. Have you ever in your life since applied that rigor of training to anything else? Like even maybe just on like a lesser level, obviously, but with the same sort of ethos behind it, I guess.
Yeah, I think anytime you try to do something new and you think about how NASA trains people, that's a good lesson to have learned. You can't do the same intensity, of course, 6 months of training or it was 2 years of training really for a mission. But I think in terms of the way I train my students at Lehigh, I train them for success. In other words, I want them to be confident when they graduate, so I don't beat them up too much. They're mostly seniors, they get ready to graduate. So I try to train them for success. I give them problems that they feel good about that they can do. So my students, when they take my exam, they're hopefully learning something and preparing themselves for something they would see in their first job in industry.
And was that the way NASA trained the astronauts as well, in a very positive reinforcement sort of way? So to always kind of keep morale up?
Yes, yeah, very much so. I mean, 6 years, never a negative word.
Really?
In 6 years, yeah. We tend to be hard on ourselves. Well, you're dealing with a bunch of people that came through that selection process. They're all overachievers, so it's not a problem motivating people. So if anything, sometimes astronauts are a little too hard on themselves in certain situations, and you kind of say, okay, we made a mistake, so let's move on. The mode of teaching that I like to do anyways is that positive reinforcement.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Okay, so now you had a second space flight lined up at NASA, but after 6 years, you left to return to Bell Labs, correct?
Yes, that was a very hard decision to make because it was a good mission that I ended up not going on. It was a joint mission with the Germans, processing materials in a laboratory inside the space shuttle. So most of the training was done in Munich, and the other astronauts didn't know I had turned that mission down. In fact, I didn't tell them until a couple of years ago at a reunion. I mentioned it at that time because whoever was selected instead and all, I didn't want them to think I bailed out on them and didn't fly the mission. But it was a tough decision because right at that time, 1984, the government was breaking up the Bell system. So the place I worked, Bell Laboratories, was being split up and divided between different parts of AT&T and all the other companies that were coming out of the Bell system. So they told me if I wanted to have a career there, I've been gone for 6 years, that I really needed to come back then. So I kind of thought about it for about 3 weeks, and then I went in and told George Abbey, who selects all the crews for the missions, that would like to go back to. And he was very understanding. He said, totally support that. You did a great job on this mission, and we appreciate that. So that was a nice way to leave.
Yeah, and I just think for a lot of people who might have a hard time understanding why you might want to trade space for an earthbound engineering career, what for you was the ultimate draw when it came to engineering? Why was that career path so important to you that after 3 weeks you decided your career as an astronaut was over?
It is a hard decision, and many astronauts have had to make that decision. I'd say about half will stay for their entire career. To me, I was always interested in something new with technology, and it may surprise you, but when you're an astronaut, you're kind of limited in what you can do. I mean, you're in operations, so you have to be focused on that, but all the engineering is being done by the people that are designing the next mission and the next thing to go, and that part of me, that engineering part of me, was not something I could enjoy. Your engineering knowledge helps you in operations, but if you want to be designing things and building new things, then the astronaut's job is not the one to be in. So I decided to go back, and I ended up the head of engineering for AT&T's satellite division, which was a wonderful job to go back to.
Oh, okay. All right. And so, but a year after you left NASA, your pilot, Francis Richard Scobie, was one of 7 crew members who was killed aboard the Challenger. Were you watching that launch?
I was. I was at work at Bell Labs actually that morning, so it was pretty difficult. And the school teacher, was killed as part of that too. It was a very tough time, and we all went down to Houston, of course, for the service. And President Reagan came down and delivered a wonderful address to everybody. So, but it was a tough time for the whole nation. But especially, I lost five friends all one morning. Of the 7 astronauts, I knew 5 very well, and as you said, Dick Scobie was my pilot on my mission.
How did that affect your view of the space program?
Well, we at least I expected to have a loss. It's hard. The very best launch vehicle rocket we've ever built is up around 98% reliability, and sure enough, we lost 2 space shuttles. So I wasn't surprised that we would have a loss. What I was surprised is that the nature of the loss. In fact, it was true of the second one when we lost Columbia. In both cases, NASA understood the problem. In the case of the Challenger, it was the seals in the solid rockets. When they got cold, they weren't fitting right. And in the case of Columbia, it was ice coming off the tank. So both those problems were pretty well understood, but they thought they had fixes coming along and all that kind of thing. They just underestimated that it could get out of control and cause a loss of a vehicle and a crew. So that was pretty hard to take, because I always had such high regard for NASA and their engineering judgment. But here, the pressure to fly more frequently was building, and people that were making those decisions, it was starting to erode their better judgment, to try to fly faster. So that was particularly hard to take. If something just blew up and for some unknown reason that they weren't watching, that would have been a little easier to accept. But here with a known problem, it was pretty hard to accept it.
Yeah. Oh, I can't imagine. And in terms of the future for space exploration, you've said that your number one priority would be an asteroid recovery mission, and that questions a mission like that would answer would be perhaps more interesting than landing on the moon again. And so why do you say that, and what do you think we could learn from a mission like that?
Well, actually, it's the scientists that are speaking out. We've gone through a couple reversals here, which is a little unfortunate. The Bush administration had been focused on the replacement for the shuttle being a large rocket called Ares, and then going back to the moon. Then in 2008, when Obama became president in 2009, the scientists kind of prevailed upon him that going back to the moon was not worth all the cost, because the science was so limited on the moon. You always learn something, but we had learned so much about the moon on Apollo that the scientists wanted to take the next step and get an asteroid. And an asteroid, being the primordial material of the solar system, was a lot more scientific interest. So they reversed the program then under Obama. They're still building the same rocket, but now the mission changed to one of capturing an asteroid.
Okay, so that is actually underway, that particular goal.
Well, no. They're still building the rocket. In fact, next year we're going to test the rocket. It's called Space Launch System, and it uses a lot of space shuttle technology, the solid rockets and so forth. But it's as big as a Saturn V. It's a huge rocket. So what we're going to do with it is still a little unknown. The scientists still want to do the asteroid, but then when Trump came in, then he's decided to change the mission again and go back to the moon again. He wanted it to be during his first term, and NASA said, well, we can't do that. It's not possible. So it's still kind of up in the air a little bit. Nothing's funded except building the first 4 rockets. I think they're going to build the first 4. And then the command module is called Orion. And it's a lot like the Apollo module, except it's a little bit bigger, so it holds 4 astronauts. So all that's being prepared, and they've actually test flown the command module too, the capsule. So they can do either mission now when they decide which one they'll fund it. After these 4 test flights, they could do like a 5-month mission to an asteroid to bring it back, or they could do a remote mission and bring it back and then send crews to a parking spot between the Earth and the Moon where they could park the asteroid. So there's a lot of different scenarios, but we'll have to hopefully listen to the scientists and choose the one that's going to be the most scientifically interesting for the program.
I think the key phrase there is listen to the scientists. Okay, so transitioning to Lehigh, and what was the impetus to teach, and why did you choose Lehigh?
Well, my alma mater.
You have several.
I always loved the Lehigh Valley and all, and I felt like I wanted to teach. I'm a techno nerd, everybody enjoyed technology. And I always liked, back in pilot training, I did it a lot. I would help my fellow students in pilot training understand some of the engineering principles that the Air Force was teaching us. I enjoyed explaining it to them and trying to put it in terms that they could learn it without having a technical training that I had. So explaining things, in other words, I enjoyed that. So I thought, well, I'm going to try to retire from industry early enough, young enough, that I can make this transition. Because every course you teach, every new course you teach is kind of like writing a book, so you really have to buckle down and study and prepare, and because you have to learn it well enough yourself to explain it to someone else. So I made that transition like 15 years ago now, I guess. And it took a year or two to get comfortable in the classroom. And then I loved it. I just wanted to teach more courses. So I've built out. So I teach 3 in the fall and 4 courses in the spring.
And has there been anything surprising about teaching that you've discovered over the years?
I'm constantly surprised by how bright some of my students are. I mean, it's really remarkable. And I try to think, well, why is that? Why are they they're so much quicker at absorbing things? And I think a lot of it, kind of grown up with the internet. When we had a question back in the 60s, if you wanted to research something, you'd have to trudge down in the library and start digging up all these books that were written 100 years ago and try to put the whole thing together. And now they go click, 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 and they got it all in front of them, and all the manuscripts from the different societies, engineering societies, are available. So they learn really quick, and so it's just so much fun and challenging to teach someone that's that quick, because they'll always be asking me questions that I have to think hard about, so it's fun. I enjoy it.
Oh, that's great. And so where do your aerospace students tend to end up when they graduate? What are a few examples?
All over the industry. I mean, some don't. Some take the aerospace minor, but they don't work in aerospace industry per se. They may work in a different engineering field. But certainly a lot at NASA. Probably have maybe, I want to guess, around 20 former students working at different NASA locations. Several at SpaceX, a handful at JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and Lockheed and Boeing a lot, of course. So it's fun. And some will stay in touch with me. It's always good to get a note every once in a while to hear about the exciting projects that they're working on. And it also gives me the opportunity to put my current students in touch with former students that are in these different jobs, where they can find out what's really going on in those companies in terms of future programs and hiring and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Are there any favorite stories that you have about students who've gotten back in touch with you about what they've gone on to do?
The most exciting one, I think, was, I won't mention his name, but he's out at SpaceX. He's moved on now, but he was at SpaceX when they were doing these booster flybacks. don't know if you saw any of those, but they launched the Falcon rocket, and then the boosters would fly back and land on the pad in Florida. And one of them downrange, the main booster was too far downrange when it finally ran out of fuel to get back to Florida, so it would land on the floating platform out in the Atlantic Ocean. So when they first tried that, it failed and it crashed, which is normal. It's a real tough thing to do. And then the second one failed, the second one succeeded and it landed. And my phone went off about 10 minutes later, and he called. He said, "We did it." Yeah, I said, "I saw you did it."
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, so when you were named back in February to deliver the commencement address for the 2020 class, you called it the honor of my life to be selected to do that. And so this is coming from the guy who was selected out of 8,000 applicants to be an astronaut for NASA. So why was that distinction so meaningful to you?
Yeah, it really was the honor of my life. But Lehigh's, it truly is my alma mater, my adopted mother. So I think in terms of my life, really beginning at Lehigh, and that part of my education was so important to everything I did in the rest of my career. So, here, flash forward 50 years later after graduating, to be selected to come back and be the speaker for our graduating class was truly an honor. So I hope I have since the speech is all written and ready to go, I hope I have a chance to give it here in the future.
And for those students who will listen to this, what do you want them to know?
Well, I tell a lot of stories about NASA that are kind of stories that show the importance of teamwork. Sure, you need a lot of people that are well trained, and they have to understand their technology and the jobs they're doing, but they have to work together, as a team to make anything important happen. And more, our society, our life becomes increasingly complex with every generation. There's always a room for individual contributors, but more and more you need interdisciplinary focus with people with all different kinds of skills coming together to accomplish something that no one person could possibly do.
Yeah, I can't think of a much more important message than teamwork right now in this era.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I ask you just one pandemic question?
Sure.
So what do you think a pandemic means for space exploration?
Well, I never thought about that connection. One of the quotes I like the best is when Bill Anders, one of the Apollo 8 astronauts, was circling the moon on Christmas Eve in 1968. That first mission to the moon, before the lander was ready, they were orbiting that Christmas Eve, and they saw the Earth rise, over the horizon of the moon, and they hadn't thought about that. They hadn't planned it. Or he grabbed a camera real quick and he snapped that picture of the Earth rise. And the quote that went with that from him was, "We came to explore the moon, and we discovered the Earth." And I think that sums up pretty much what I think the future of the space program is that we look back upon ourselves at the Earth and we see how perishable our atmosphere is, how thin it is, and you look down, you don't see political boundaries at all. You just see all these continents, and it gives you a sense of, boy, we need to take good care of this place, and we need to take good care of each other. And I think that's maybe 200 years from now, when historians look back upon the space program, they'll say, yeah, that's the best thing that came out of the space program, was that sense of unity that people need to live better here on Earth.
That's it for today's show. I'd like to thank Terry Hart for being so generous with his time. And I have to say, I had so many more questions. Like, honestly, what did he think of The Martian? So anyways, maybe we'll have him on again someday for a part 3. I do want to mention that Terry didn't just operate the mechanical arm during his 1984 space mission. He also operated a 70-pound IMAX camera. You can watch that footage in the 1985 documentary, The Dream is Alive. And as he said, Terry teaches 3 courses in the fall and 4 courses in the spring. He also teaches the ground school segment of the FAA's pilot training course. The 2-credit class has no prerequisites, and it's open to students from all of Lehigh's colleges. For more information about these and other academic programs at the P.C. Rawson College of Engineering and Applied Science, and to find our show, head to engineering.lehigh.edu. Music in this episode is by Blue Dot Sessions. You can subscribe to Rawson Connection wherever you like to listen. And send us story suggestions or feedback on Twitter at Rawson Podcast. Thanks for listening, and stay safe.